The 1,000-acre complex is located in a corner of the Crab Orchard National Wildlife Refuge. It is the U.S. Penitentiary at Marion, Illinois, sometimes called the House of Pain or the End of the Line. Once it was the scene of the customary prison violence, exploding in a week of rampage in October 1983 that left 2 guards knifed to death and an inmate killed. Since that time, something approaching calm has prevailed at Marion. But are we paying too high a price for that peace? Bob Fall reports from the belly of the beast.
This is America's toughest prison, for what the U.S. Bureau of Prisons calls the worst of the worst.
Now we have all our rotten apples in one barrel.
In this barrel, most of those apples are kept in virtual solitary confinement, lockdown, in tiny 6 by 9 foot cells, 23 hours a day.
Alienate them. That's the number one goal. Alienate them. Make them feel forgotten, abandoned by the people on the streets, society, their family, their friends.
Where else in the world is there a place that people are locked up for 4 years straight, 23 hours a day?
For almost 300 men in Marion's lockdown, there is no work, no group activity, no church.
We're being treated as a kind of a hazardous waste.
It makes you angry. It makes you bitter.
Some people, they go crazy. Other people, they break them.
Marion is unique. No other prison in U.S. history has been in lockdown this long. And U.S. officials say the Get Tough policy, which began here 4 years ago, will be permanent.
We have one basic requirement. We require inmates to behave themselves for a period of time.
Prison critics say Marion is barbaric, designed not just to control inmates, but to humiliate and then break them. Marion, say the critics, turns men into animals.
I don't think there's any question that it's a form of slow torture.
Marion is a mind control prison where your human spirit is not meant to survive. Your human spirit is meant to be broken.
Prison rules, for example. Officials say if inmates conform, they can return to other prisons. But inmates swear the rules are always changing, that they don't know what they have to do to get out.
I wash the socks, I hang them on the bars. I'm told to take that off. Now, if I don't do that, that means another year in this place.
Marion cost a small fortune, almost $40,000 a year for each prisoner, roughly twice other federal prisons. Every time a man is moved here, 3 guards accompany him. To keep weapons and drugs out, inmates who come back from court appearances have body cavities examined by x-ray or by hand.
It made me feel just like a woman that got raped. That's how I felt. Because it was the same thing, I'm telling you.
Prison officials insist that Marion is essential, that it makes prisoners elsewhere toe the line so they won't get sent here.
The frustration, the rage that builds, you say then, can be a good thing?
Definitely. I mean, as long as everything is cream and roses and you got your own way, why should you change? I don't see any other better way of doing it at this point in time.
But Marion's critics contend everything Marion controls now will explode later.
If you mistreat them, and you mistreat them for long periods of time, that mistreatment eventually comes back to haunt you.
You are now creating violent people, without any question about it. The Marions of the world are nothing but sitting time bombs.
It's like you put a dog in a cage and poke it with sticks and abuse it and treat it badly for years, and then you let it out of the cage. Do you expect it to be a good pet? Tell it to go play with its children? Of course not. You can't expect that to happen with prisoners either.
The question then is whether America's safest prison is also America's most dangerous. Bob Fall, CBS News, Marion, Illinois.
We have put a real dilemma for the prison system on the American agenda tonight. The problem is this: what do you do with those prison inmates who are the worst troublemakers, the most violent, the ones who make it nearly impossible for prison authorities to go about the business of confining and rehabilitating other inmates? The federal government and 2/3 of the states have found what they believe is a solution: segregating the very meanest in special prisons with so-called super maximum security and minimal privileges. The toughest prison in the land is in Marion, Illinois, and our agenda reporter is Walter Rogers.
Marion is psychological and physical torture. Most men can't handle it.
Closed hand.
They even try to escape. You know, they even try to jump the fence to get shot, kill themselves. They tired of it. They can't handle it no more.
There's no other alternative, because these are people who have a long history of either hurting people or trying to break out of prison, and they've had every reasonable opportunity to function in an open population.
For nearly 2 years, Warden John Clark, a former Roman Catholic priest, kept the lid on what critics call the most repressive prison in the country. Marion collects the most dangerous gang leaders and troublemakers from other federal and state prisons, like multiple murderer Matthew Granger.
You don't understand what I was.
Russian novelist Dostoevsky once wrote, "The degree of civilization in a society can be judged by entering its prisons. That judgment would be harsh for anyone setting foot in any of our nation's 123 federal prisons." A series of new reports by the Justice Department's Inspector General found unsafe conditions in chronically understaffed facilities that are falling apart and have failing security systems that allow prisoners to smuggle in cell phones, drugs, and weapons. In tonight's Prime Focus, ABC News Chief Justice correspondent Pierre Thomas has a look at the crisis in America's crumbling federal prisons.
America's federal prisons are home to 160,000 inmates, including some of the nation's most dangerous offenders. Yet many of the facilities are literally falling apart. A new Justice Department Inspector General report saying all 123 Federal Bureau of Prison facilities require maintenance, with some in dire need of upgrades.
We're seeing crumbling prisons. We're seeing buildings that we go into that have actually holes in the ceilings in multiple places, leading to damages to kitchens, to doctors' offices, to gymnasiums, and they're not being fixed.
Of 2021, there is currently no reopen date for the facility. Shut down because of collapsing ceilings, crumbling concrete, completely unusable kitchens, in need of repairs totaling $230 million.
We're seeing problems in every institution. It's a global problem. The business as usual isn't working for the BOP. They have to change that, and they have to address these very serious problems.
Taft Correctional Institution in California was so unsafe, DOJ also had to shut it down. Built in 1996, problems with unstable soil causing cracks throughout the facility. The report said some gaps were so big the sun shines through. Total needed repairs cost an estimated $200 million.
We're talking about structural things. Can't this bleed over to the overall security posture of an institution if you just have things that are falling into disrepair?
What we've seen is when you don't fix your infrastructure, we don't keep your building up to speed, you create safety and security issues. We've seen inmates sleeping with pipes running over their heads that leak, that aren't getting fixed. But that's what we're seeing, and it leads to safety and security issues.
And it's not just dilapidated buildings plaguing America's prisons. A 2021 search of a federal prison in Atlanta found 134 inmate-made weapons, marijuana, methamphetamine, and enough prescription pills to almost fill 2 one-gallon bags, and 705 cell phones, some hidden in walls. This prisoner was caught using his prison cell phone for live streaming and posting on Facebook before being caught.
I'm not just talking about guns, knives. You clearly want that out of the prison. But what we're seeing is tobacco, which is often a currency in the prisons. We're seeing synthetic drugs coming in. We're seeing cell phones coming in. A cell phone in a prison is a deadly weapon.
Broken and outdated security cameras have been another huge problem. Recent inspections found 142 of 263 security cameras at that federal prison in Atlanta were inoperable or malfunctioning. MCC, where Jeffrey Epstein died by suicide, also had serious operational issues related to security camera functionality. For corrections officers, none of these findings are a surprise.
We've been complaining about our prison conditions for many, many years. And it's the conditions of confinement for the offenders, but it's also the working conditions that our employees work in.
Bureau of Prisons Director Colette Peters said the BOP will carefully evaluate and implement any necessary corrective actions to ensure that our mission of operating safe, secure, and humane facilities continues to be fulfilled. Fixing our failing federal prisons is not going to be cheap. The Bureau of Prisons estimates that it will cost upwards of $2 billion to make needed repairs and modernize aging facilities. But annual budget requests by successive administrations are usually a tenth of that, and Congress authorizes even less. Lindsay?
Comes with quite a hefty price tag to bring about change. Pierre, our thanks to
A man who is part of the reason the Supermax prison was built has died.
67-year-old Thomas Silverstein died this month. He was in intensive care following a surgery earlier this year. Continuing our coverage of Colorado at 6, Silverstein went to prison back in '78 for armed robbery. He was later found guilty of killing a prison guard and 2 inmates at a federal pen in Indiana. Well, those murders inspired the design of the Supermax prison here in Florence, Colorado. Silverstein was moved there in 2005. It's believed he spent more time in solitary confinement than any other federal inmate. He was in solitary at various prisons since 1983.
What's going on, you guys? Welcome back. Another episode of Greenlit Gang TV. Really appreciate you guys checking out the channel. Much love to everybody who's liked, commented, subscribed. Means everything. Love having the conversations about a lot of these stories we talk about. So anyway, today we're going to be going back in time a little bit. We're going to be covering a very infamous individual within the prison system, in particular the federal prison system, a guy by the name of Clayton Fountain. Name should probably ring bells if you like true crime, if you like anything to do with that whole prison underworld and that whole, just the same stuff I cover, same stuff I'm really interested in. If you guys are into that, I'm sure you've heard of Clayton Fountain. He, along with Thomas Silverstein, were the ones that took place in the early 80s that murdered the guards in the United States Penitentiary at Marion. And basically, that penitentiary went on complete lockdown for years after these murders took place. 2 guards killed in the same day. We're going to get into that more in just a bit. We're going to talk about his early life just a little bit. So he was born on September 12th, 1955. He was born in Fort Benning, Georgia. Born on September 12th, 1955 at the U.S. Army Hospital in Fort Benning, Georgia. He was the oldest of 6 children, having 1 brother and 4 sisters. He was named after his father, Clayton Raleigh Fountain. The family moved, and this is important to remember, okay, because he's what you say, like an army brat, right? The family moved every 1.5 to 2 years, while his father served in combat tours in Korea and Vietnam, and his mom also worked. So kind of sounds like Clayton was on his own for probably a lot of the time. If you guys were moving around every 1.5, 2 years, my mom experienced this a little bit. Obviously, this is different, but my mom, her father was in the Air Force, then he worked for the Boeing company, and they moved in her childhood, I believe, 15 times until the age of 18. So she spoke to that, how it affected her brothers, especially her oldest, who went on to struggle with major, major addiction issues. And you just can't ever settle. And then the minute you make friends, you're moving again. So I'm sure Clayton Fountain probably experienced something like this. And you got to remember, Clayton Fountain was the oldest child. So I absolutely do not doubt that a lot of responsibility at a young age was left on his shoulders that he probably shouldn't have had and that most kids did not have. As the oldest child in the family, he became a surrogate parent for both, basically became a surrogate for both parents when he was very young. He recalled maternal responsibilities, cooking, cleaning, ironing, serving food. And overall, you just got to take care of your siblings. Clayton Fountain ends up enrolling and enlisting in the U.S. Marines, but things kind of go left, all right? So, at the age of 19, he's convicted of murdering his staff sergeant while stationed in the Philippines. He stole and disassembled a pistol from the ship's armory, brought it ashore, and used it to rob a Filipino guard of his shotgun. He then used the shotgun to murder his staff sergeant. No words were exchanged as Fountain walked up, shot him once in the chest, and after a brief walk, he took 5 hostages. It said that Fountain had been written up by the staff sergeant Wren for wearing PT gear, which is like physical training gear, on the mess deck in the mess hall. That's where you go eat. Fountain later had 2 years added to his sentence for aggravated assault and attempted escape. Now, he would go on to kill 5 people in total. We're going to get into that. So the guy was, I didn't get a ton of his background other than, what we just talked about. I would say, you kill 5 people, you're a psychopath. I'm just going to say it. Doesn't mean he didn't do any good. He served his country. Sounds like he took care of his siblings, but somewhere along the line, some wires got crossed. So he was sentenced to life imprisonment and was ultimately sent to the United States Penitentiary in Marion, which is Marion, Illinois, which was at the time the highest security prison in the United States. Fountain went on to murder 3 prisoners and 1 correctional officer with a shiv while serving time at Marion. He was labeled, quote, the most dangerous prisoner in the federal system. And we're going to talk about the murders here in a sec, but, Thomas Silverstein got a lot of that, what you would call media coverage or spotlight for the murders of those prison guards. He ended up being like the longest serving, isolated prisoner. But Clayton Fountain was right there with him. Clayton Fountain was right there participating in this stuff, right there getting bodies on him, putting in work. Very, very dangerous individual. So another example of this, Fountain and another inmate, Hugh Colomb, who was serving a 25-year sentence for armed bank robbery, were convicted of voluntary manslaughter and conveying a weapon in prison and had 15 years out of their sentence. Colomb ended up getting out in 2015. He died on June 21st, 2016 at the age of 62. Now, we're going to be talking about the morning. We're going to be talking about the morning all the way back in October in 1983. 2 guards were stabbed to death at United States Penitentiary Marion. Many have heard of Thomas Silverstein, who killed Officer Merle Klutz. And Thomas Silverstein would go on to talk about how Klutz was evil. He would basically berate Thomas Silverstein, make his life a living hell, take away personal items, little comfort things. There's been some pushback against that, basically saying, no, Silverstein just did it to do it and to, show who's the most violent, to really show who's a man, right, and all that. But, it goes on to talk about what's not so well known is the story of the other murder that day, the murder of Officer Hoffman at the hands of Clayton Fountain. There was a quote from an individual who was there and who basically was prosecuting Clayton Fountain. A quote said, "I have never, in 18 years of law practice, ever found a stone-cold killer that deserves the death penalty more than he does," talking about Clayton Fountain. He goes on to say, quote, "Serial killer is defined as a person who kills 3 or more people. Given that definition, then Fountain was an absolutely serial killer." And that was before he murdered Officer Hoffman. The date of the murders was actually October 22nd, 1983. Officer Robert Hoffman was assigned to the control unit. And I'm sorry, I said 8:30 in the morning. It happened at 8:30 at night. And this is the one thing to remember. Hoffman was kind of labeled a hero. He didn't have to run to where he did. He observed 2 officers being assaulted by inmate Clayton Fountain. Fountain was being returned to his cell when he broke free from his escorts, obtained a knife from another inmate, because remember, all this is orchestrated. So the murder of Klutz, the murder of Hoffman, the attack on these guards, everything was orchestrated, okay? And he started to attack the 2 officers. Robert Hoffman was in a completely safe area, and he ran to render assistance. He ended up being repeatedly stabbed by Clayton Fountain. And then the other 2 staff members were injured, and then they were finally able to restrain Fountain. But Officer Hoffman ended up succumbing to his wounds. Overall, 4 staff victims. There were 4 staff victims, and they survived serious injuries. That, to me, is pretty crazy in the sense of Clayton Fountain's one guy. He's one guy. Yes, he's got a knife, and I don't know, I can't speak to exactly what kind of protective weapons the guards carried, but I'm sure they had something. I'm sure they had maybe mace of some sort, a baton. So, I mean, you got to be one bad dude, and I mean that in the literal sense, like he's not a good person, but I also kind of mean it, and like, you got to be a little bit of a badass to go after, multiple guards, whether you got a knife or not, and then 4 end up getting seriously wounded. That is no joke. So it says at the time of the attack on Officer Hoffman, inmate Fountain was a U.S. Navy military prisoner serving 2 life sentences for murder. He was responsible for 5 deaths during the 10 years he had been incarcerated, 4 deaths, including Officer Hoffman's, while in the Federal Bureau of Prisons custody. And basically what they did was, he'd do these murders, they would just give him an additional life sentence. Clayton Fountain would end up dying at a Federal Bureau of Prison of a heart attack on July 12th, 2004. And it kind of talked about, why he did what he did, why he killed Hoffman, and all it was, and this is kind of what I mean by, Thomas Silverstein was trying to say, well, Merle Klutz berated me, he didn't treat me well, and maybe some of that's true. I'm not going to say that it's not true. You can't speak to that. Like I said, there's your side of the story, my side of the story, and somewhere in between there's the truth. I had a boss that told me that once. There's 3 sides to it. Yours, mine, and then the truth, right? And I think in this case that absolutely that phrase applies here. It says, though, that Clayton Fountain killed Officer Hoffman with the competition he had of people that Thomas Silverstein had killed. After Fountain killed his 5th and final victim in 1984, he was giving a special, and this is really important to remember, why we talked about with Marion, okay, and isolation and solitary confinement. These killings really ratcheted up the use of solitary confinement. Remember, Marion went on that years-long lockdown. He was given a special cell deep in the heart of the Federal Medical Center in Springfield, Missouri. It went on to say how people thought he deserved to be hanged. And I'm reading, just to give you guys an idea really quick, I'm reading from a guy who has a great YouTube channel. He was an ex-Federal Bureau of Prisons guard who actually knew and not represented, but knew and worked basically as a guard with these inmates. The channel is called As the Key Turns, and I highly encourage you to go check that channel out. It's really cool. I've heard some people say the way he tells stories and stuff they don't really like, but overall, I think it's a really interesting, awesome channel. He gives firsthand accounts of these guys, and I'm reading from something he wrote on a Reddit post. So his opinion was, it says he deserved to be hanged for what he did. But at the time of the killings, there was no federal death penalty. That ended up changing, and even though no prisoners have been executed yet for killing a federal prison guards, juries don't believe our lives are that valuable. And I do believe in today's world especially that applies. That was his opinion, okay? That was this guy who has the channel of As the Key Turns. It's his opinion. What I do think, and nowadays, it's just one of those things where being a cop, being a prison guard, it's not all that glamorous. And if anything now, it's even riskier because of the way the world views law enforcement. They're viewed as the bad guys in a way, man. You see this stuff in other certain cities, defund the police, stuff like that. It's real. So it goes on to talk about how the cell that Fountain had in Springfield, Missouri was set up so that he had no contact with anybody but the guards. It was basically decided that the officers would never speak to him. When he was fed 3 times a day, the guy feeding him would refuse to respond to anything Clayton Fountain was saying or asking. And it kind of, his opinion again, but it's true. It said, this may not sound like much of a punishment, but I can assure you it is. And think about it. Few humans can stand total social isolation for very long. There's that old Cat Williams joke where he talks about jail, right? And he talks about how he goes in, he says, you want to know what jail's like? Go in the closet, turn the light off, and stand there. It's funny when he says it, but it's real, okay? And now you can imagine the most extreme version of that. You're deep in this facility, a medical facility. They talked about that with Thomas Silverstein. He had this special cell that was lit at all hours of the day. A conveyor belt would bring him the things he needed. 0 human contact. The guards, this As the Key Turns channel said that the guards would call it putting prisoners on the program. And basically they would watch. And this is kind of messed up, man. But you got to remember, if you're a guard and you just watched 2 of your coworkers, 2 of your friends get absolutely butchered by these guys, I don't care. It's easy for people to say, nope, you got to do your job. Nah, man. You're gonna wish the absolute worst on them, and you're going to torture them. And if you can't do it physically, you're going to try to do it mentally. You're going to try to break them. And they did. So it talks about the guards would watch as people started to lose touch with reality in less than 3 months. Clayton Fountain was subjected to this treatment for over a decade. That is insane. For over 10 years, complete isolation, no human contact. The punishment for the murder of a guard, quote, is insanity. And that gives me chills saying that, because it's like, I believe that is worse than death. I think, yes, the death penalty, that's no joke. It would suck to be sitting there on death row, not exactly sure what days it's going to come, but at least you're not socially isolated. At least you're not literally losing your mind. And then what happens is mental illness develops when you're socially isolated. Bipolar, schizophrenia. Literally, you will go insane. where it becomes something that is just, man, this is really, really bad and I'm miserable, to now I'm literally having mental illness effects because of what they've done to me. So they would put them, okay, now check this out. They would basically said, it is inflicted upon the prisoner by means of social isolation and the withholding of the acknowledgement of his existence. He is treated as if he were a ghost. Talks about Fountain. He was one of the few prisoners who was locked up and the key was thrown away. 21 years he was subjected of that. The only human voices, and this is really messed up where they would put him, the only human voices he was to hear on a regular basis were those from the unit for the criminally insane that was in the same building. So this is all planned out. This is all a purpose to this. He could hear their screams and cries from his cell. He would attempt to yell back. He would try to yell and the guards would basically come and shut him up. And it was rare that the insane prisoners even attempted to answer him back. Because this guy, as the Key Turns wrote it, their demons were too loud for them to hear him yell out. He sat alone, unacknowledged, for year upon year. He had plenty of time to reflect on the mistakes of his life. And talks about how this is the story of those mistakes. He ends up getting 5 consecutive life sentences. He ends up being buried at a cemetery in the Ozark Mountains of the Missouri on July 11th, 2005. And, talks about how he was a well-trained Marine in the Philippines and talked about how he would use his well-trained, to great advantage in prison. So he had these skills and this knowledge. And, he said he was part of 3rd Platoon Hotel Company, 2nd Battalion, 4th Marine Station at Camp Hansen in Okinawa, Japan. He was sent to jump school, became a paratrooper by the 3rd Special Forces Unit. And, but he didn't have the mental fortitude. He wasn't good with authority. And he got into it with his Staff Sergeant Wren. And it talked about, though, this is really interesting, that the Staff Sergeant Wren almost became jealous of Fountain. Talked about how Fountain became proficient with his hands, a knife, and it just talks about how Staff Sergeant Wren seemed to take it as a personal insult that a private was doing the same job as he was. Staff Sergeant Wren took every opportunity to make a complaint against Clayton Fountain or members of his squad. He even took to assaulting Fountain when there were no witnesses about. So this is kind of, I know this guy's been covered, but I'm trying to give you guys maybe a little more insight into this because if you know about Fountain, you do know he killed a staff sergeant, but see, this stuff's really interesting to me, and I hope stuff maybe you haven't heard. Fountain also refused to sign off on bogus charges that Staff Sergeant Wren made against members of Fountain's squad. This publicly embarrassed Wren, and a mere private was more beloved by him, more beloved than himself by this company, of this guys. Because, that's all you got. At the end of the day, it's all about your respect. In prison, in the Marine Corps, when you're in the Philippines or in Japan, you're with a bunch of guys. It's a male-dominated area, and all you've got is respect. And this Staff Sergeant Wren obviously saw just a mere private, Clayton Fountain, as a huge, huge threat. And it said that Staff Sergeant Wren took it upon himself to conduct a vendetta against Fountain and any member of his squad in a bid to save face. It said that even the charges he tried to place on Fountain were dismissed, and he ended up getting reprimanded. And it said that this set in motion the almost inevitable set of actions that could only end in tragedy. And there was a deployment for 3 months. The argument became physical, and it said Staff Sergeant Wren slapped Fountain for talking back to him. Now, Fountain spit a mouthful of blood in Wren's face. This caused him to use an M14 to butt stroke Clayton Fountain, so he hit him with it, breaking 3 of his ribs. And it said that the incident was judged to be accidental, and no charges were filed against either man. And then after the deployment, Fountain's unit was put on board a Navy ship as a combat-ready force for deployment throughout Asia. When he was docked in the Philippines, he reconnected with his girlfriend. It said it was a hooker at a local bar. She was 4 months pregnant. She said the child was his, and he believed her. Not going to lie, that kind of sad, because it said that he believed her, but I would highly doubt that. He gave her a wedding ring, but they were never formally married. Neither the U.S. military or the Philippine government recognized the marriage. When the ship and the battalion went back to sea, Staff Sergeant Wren continued to physically assault Fountain. And, it's never okay to kill somebody. But, man, if this is all true, and this is what he's doing, And it said that on the day of May 1st, 1974, Fountain had prepared all night for an inspection that day. After cleaning and displaying his gear, his platoon lieutenant ordered his men, including Fountain, on a 10-mile run. And upon completion of the run, the platoon was ordered to the mess hall. Staff Sergeant Wren saw Fountain in the mess hall and ordered him to put on his uniform. When he returned to the platoon area, the first sergeant told him to report to the mess hall and dressed up as he was. When Fountain returned to the mess hall, he encountered Wren, who didn't speak to Fountain. On the 6th of May, Staff Sergeant Wren brought formal charges against Fountain for disobeying his orders. So he's getting 2 sets of orders. And said Clayton attacked a Marine guard, took the guard's loaded 12-gauge shotgun. He then went to the Grand Island on the rest and relaxation area for service personnel. He knew that Staff Sergeant Wren would be attending the battalion party there. He located him, ran up to him, and shot him point blank with the shotgun. Took 5 Marines hostage for several hours. He exchanged shots with the military, the police SWAT team, and, he ends up getting convicted of murder. And anyway, so he gets into the prison system like we talked about, joins the Aryan Brotherhood. Obviously, the Aryan Brotherhood is, you call it like a 1%er gang. They take a liking to people like Clayton Fountain. Clayton Fountain, just reading all of that, he was specifically made for the Aryan Brotherhood. With his skills, with his respect that he garnered. And I will say this real quick. If all that is true about what that staff sergeant did to him, you don't want to say he had it coming. But man, I don't know how you expect to treat a man, especially in a stressful situation when you're in a different country and all this stuff's going on, and not to have anything happen to you. Interestingly enough, okay, after all these murders and all this stuff had happened, there was a book that came out, and it was basically about how Clayton Fountain, the killer of 5 men who was condemned to live out his days in solitary confinement in a steel and concrete cell built especially for him, astonishingly made a remarkable religious conversion. And the book goes on to tell about how the author worked to redeem Clayton Fountain's wasted life. And it argued that Fountain's rehabilitation, which saw him transform into a well-educated, articulate monk, is evidence that the death penalty should be abolished. I don't know. Fountain died young. He died of a heart attack at the age of 49 years old. And it's just one of those things, man, where that's a crazy, crazy life. It's a sad life. It's good to see, I guess, at the end there when he did become a monk. And religion is one of those things in prison system that I think it's good, right? As a Christian person myself, it's good. I've been in rehab. I've been in jail. I remember I had nowhere else to turn, okay? I had horrible addiction issues. I'd made awful choices, and I had nothing. I literally lost everything. And I remember reading the Bible every night in jail. I remember reading the Bible every night in daily prayer reads in treatment. I remember spending Christmas of 2016 in detox facility, just sitting there, nothing, being told if I tried to get out, because you can leave detox, technically you can leave a detox facility at any time. I literally remember being told by my family, by my mom in particular, if you try to come home, we're going to lock you out. And I'm just saying that because religion in jail, a lot of people knock it. They go, well, of course he found God, right? They roll their eyes. Well, of course he found God in prison, right? And sometimes that's true. Sometimes it is BS. Guys come out, they're preaching big, they want to make all these changes. They get out, and they have no idea what to do with it or how to act, and they end up going right back, and all that stuff is BS, or maybe they used it to get out on parole. I don't know. Clayton Fountain passed away. He'd done a lot of horrible things. He'd done some good things, like serving his country, taking care of his brothers and sisters. I don't know. The author, who knew him, seems to think that he was a changed man. I would love to hear from you guys down below what you think about religion and finding God in prison. I really want to know what you think. If you have a personal experience, please feel free to talk about it. If you can speak to it on a good note, hey, I got a brother, a sister, a family member that found God, and they've been great ever since. But tell me the negative too. Tell me how you had an ex or a brother or a sister or mom or dad that would talk a big game when they were locked up, and then they'd get out and it would all fall apart. So Anyway, there you guys have it. I got a recommendation to do this guy a few months back. If that person who wrote that recommendation is seeing this, I did see it. That's why I decided to do it for you guys. I do read all the comments. I do listen to you guys. I try to take in what you guys tell me. I try to get the ideas you guys give me and look them up. But anyway, really appreciate you guys. And until next time, peace.